He's coaching college kids in Norfolk, Virginia. They call him Coach Vick. They don't think about Leavenworth. They don't think about the pit bulls, the shallow graves, the federal indictment. They don't think about the number, $17,600,000. That's what Michael Vick owed when he was mopping floors in a federal prison for pennies an hour. He paid almost all of it back. The trustee called it nearly unheard of. So here's the question we've never actually answered. What do we do with a man who did both of those things? Newport News, Virginia. Not a place that produces a lot of first overall picks. It's a shipyard town. Hard work, steady noise, men who come home tired and don't talk much about it. The kind of place where a kid either finds a way out or finds a way to stay. There isn't much in between. Michael Vick grew up in the Ridley Circle housing projects. His mother worked multiple jobs. His father was in and out. The neighborhood had its own economy, its own rules, its own entertainment. And if you grew up in certain parts of southeastern Virginia in the 1980s and 90s, dogfighting wasn't something you read about in a news story. It was something that happened 3 blocks away, sometimes closer. We're going to come back to that. But first, 1999. Lane Stadium, Blacksburg, Virginia. If you were watching college football that year, you remember the first time you saw Michael Vick run, not the highlights afterward. The first time, live, when you still didn't know what you were looking at. He moved at a speed that didn't belong at that level. Quarterback was almost the wrong word for it. He was doing things at the position that the position wasn't designed to do. Virginia Tech went 11-1 that year. They went to the national championship game, and every defensive coordinator in the country spent the offseason trying to figure out an answer to a question no one had asked before. Nobody had a good answer. The 2001 NFL Draft. Atlanta holds the 5th pick. They trade up to number 1, giving San Diego multiple selections to do it, because their front office has decided that Michael Vick is worth restructuring the entire board for. He was 21 years old when he signed that contract. $130 million, $62 million guaranteed. At the time, the largest contract ever given to a quarterback in the history of the National Football League. Think about that for a second. Not the number. We've heard big numbers. Think about being 21 from Ridley Circle, and suddenly the largest contract in the history of your sport has your name on it. Think about every person from your neighborhood who now knows your phone number. Think about every obligation, spoken and unspoken, that arrives with that kind of money when you come from where he came from. The Falcons built an offense around a player they believed would redefine the position. And in a lot of ways, he did. We watched it happen on Sunday afternoons, that option keeper that gained 40 yards before anyone in the stadium understood what just occurred, the scramble that turned a broken play into a first down so fast the replay felt too slow to explain it. We put him in our video games because he was the only player where the game felt different, faster, harder to stop. What we didn't see, what we weren't paying attention to, was what he brought with him from Newport News. He never really left it behind. And in April of 2007, the rest of the country was about to find out exactly what that meant. Let's stay in the good part for a minute, because there was a good part, a real one. And if we're going to understand everything that came after, we have to sit in it long enough to remember what it actually felt like. The Atlanta Falcons, 2002, they went 9-6-1 that regular season. Made the playoffs as a wild card. Nobody outside Atlanta gave them a serious chance. Then they went to Green Bay, January, Lambeau Field. The kind of cold that makes the national broadcast announcers mention the temperature every 3 minutes. The Packers were favored. They had Brett Favre. They had the crowd, the history, the mystique. Michael Vick was 22 years old. He ran for 64 yards and threw for 117 more in the second half. The Falcons won 27-7, and it wasn't even that close. And what we all felt watching it, sitting in our living rooms, in our sports bars, wherever we were, wasn't just that a young quarterback had beaten Brett Favre on his own field in January. It was that we had just watched the future arrive. The Monday Night Football game against Minnesota in 2002, you remember this one whether you were a Falcons fan or not, he took an option keeper and ran 46 yards for a touchdown so fast that the camera lost him for half a second, just lost him. He was gone before the frame caught up. We rewound it. We showed it to people who hadn't seen it. We said, "Watch this," and pointed at the screen and watch them react. That's how you know something is different. When you need other people to see it too, because you don't quite trust your own eyes. He made the Pro Bowl. He broke rushing records for a quarterback. He was in every advertisement, on every magazine cover, on every video game box. And the video game, look, if you owned a copy of Madden during those years, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You picked Atlanta not because you were a Falcons fan. You picked Atlanta because of number 7. Because with him in your hands, the game worked differently. Faster. The rules felt slightly less enforced. That's not nothing. For a generation of men who grew up playing that game with their kids, with their buddies on Friday nights, Michael Vick is in your muscle memory. He's in your fingers. He was, for a window of about 4 years, the most exciting player in professional football. Not the best quarterback by traditional measure. Something harder to define than that. He was the kind of player that made you cancel plans to watch a regular season game in November. We don't say that about many people. And then the injuries started. 2003, 2004. The Falcons went 11-5 in 2004 and made the NFC Championship game. And we thought we were watching the beginning of something. A dynasty built around a player we'd never seen before. What we were actually watching was the end. We just didn't know it yet. April 25th, 2007. Law enforcement officers executed a search warrant on a property in Surry County, Virginia, 17 acres, registered to a company called MV7 LLC. The owner of record, Michael Vick. What they found on that property, we're not going to sanitize it because sanitizing it would be a lie of omission and you deserve the actual story. They found training equipment, brake sticks, a rape stand, a device used to restrain female dogs during forced breeding, treadmills designed for dogs, scales for measuring fighting weight. They found 54 dogs, most of them pit bulls, most of them bearing scars. They found 18 dogs buried in shallow graves on the back portion of the property. Federal investigators later documented the methods used to kill dogs that lost or were deemed unfit to fight: electrocution, drowning, hanging. In the indictment, and this is in the public record, this is not embellishment, there is specific language about Vick's personal participation in some of those killings, not just funding it, not just owning the land, participating. We need to stay here for a moment because this is the part where some documentaries move too fast. They give you the facts, they note that it was disturbing, and then they pivot toward the redemption because that's the easier story to tell. We're not doing that. A man who had spent the previous 6 years as the face of a franchise, the most recognizable player in the sport, a man whose jersey was on the backs of kids who had never been to Atlanta. That man had been running a dogfighting operation out of a property he kept specifically for that purpose. For years, the people close to him knew, some participated. When the investigation started, the first move was to blame the other men involved. Cousins, childhood friends, the network from Newport News that had followed him into wealth he could share. When that didn't hold, when his co-defendants started cooperating with federal prosecutors, the only move left was the one nobody wanted to make. August 27th, 2007. Michael Vick pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges related to dogfighting. He read a statement. He apologized. He said he had grown up around it, that he took full responsibility, that he wanted to make it right. The country, specifically the part of the country that watches this channel, men who own dogs, who take their dogs to parks, who have a specific and visceral reaction to the idea of an animal being killed for sport, did not want to hear any of it. And that reaction was earned. Let's be honest about that. It was not overblown. It was not a media pylon disconnected from reality. What happened on that property in Surry County was genuinely indefensibly wrong. There is no context that makes those 18 graves acceptable. The context matters for understanding how a man gets there. It does not matter for evaluating whether it was acceptable. December 10th, 2007. United States District Court, Richmond, Virginia. Judge Henry Hudson sentenced Michael Vick to 23 months in federal prison. He was 27 years old. The Falcons released him. Nike suspended his contract. Reebok pulled his merchandise. Every endorsement gone. The $130 million quarterback was, on paper, already worth less than nothing. He was taken into custody immediately after sentencing. There's a photograph from that day. He's in a suit. He's being led out of the courthouse. He's looking at something just off camera, not at the photographers, not at the crowd, just somewhere else. I've looked at that photograph a lot while working on this. I don't know what he was thinking. Nobody does. But I know what he was walking toward. USP Leavenworth, Kansas, a federal penitentiary with a history that goes back to 1903. It has housed mob bosses, spies, soldiers convicted of war crimes, and men the federal government needed to put somewhere serious. In the winter of 2007, it housed Michael Vick. He mopped floors. He worked in the kitchen. Federal prison labor pays somewhere between 12 cents and 40 cents an hour, depending on the assignment, for a man who had made, by some estimates, over $130 million across his career. The math on that is almost too strange to hold in your head. He had time to hold it, and while he was holding it, the financial machinery that his life had been running on for 6 years began to collapse in a way that numbers don't fully capture. July 2008. Michael Vick, still incarcerated, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The number: $17,600,000 in debt, mortgages on multiple properties, business obligations, civil suits from the dogfighting case, debts to people who had done business with him on the assumption that Michael Vick would always be employed by an NFL team. That assumption was no longer safe. Here's the thing about Chapter 11 that most people don't focus on, and it matters for this story. Chapter 7, bankruptcy wipes the slate. You liquidate what you have, you discharge what you can't pay, and you start over with a clean record and zero balance. Millions of Americans use it every year. There's no shame in it. Michael Vick did not file Chapter 7. He filed Chapter 11, a reorganization, a plan, a commitment that said, "I will use my future earnings to pay back the people I owe." He made that commitment from a prison cell. At the time, nobody in the NFL had offered him a contract. Nobody was required to. The league had every reason to look the other way and let him disappear. He had no leverage. He had no guarantee that there would be any future earnings to commit. He committed anyway. We don't know exactly what went through his mind during those 21 months. He's spoken about it in interviews since. The isolation, the reckoning, the specific kind of silence that a man experiences when everything that told him who he was has been taken away. The game, the money, the name on the back of strangers' jerseys. What happens to a man when those things go away? Not to the brand, not to the athlete, to the actual human being underneath all of it. Most of us watching this have never been to prison. But most of us, if we're being honest, have had a version of that moment. The moment when something we built our identity around was suddenly gone. The job, the marriage, the thing we were supposed to be. That's the mortality factor in Michael Vick's story that nobody talks about. He was 28 years old in Leavenworth, and he had already had the career arc that most men never get. He'd had the peak, he'd had the crash, and he was sitting in it, trying to figure out if there was anything left. He was released in May 2009. He had no contract. He had $17 million in debt. He had a federal conviction on his record. He had spent 21 months away from the game that was the only professional skill he possessed. And somewhere, in some NFL front office, someone had to decide whether to give him one more chance. The Philadelphia Eagles signed him on August 13, 2009. The reaction was immediate and it was loud. Protests outside Lincoln Financial Field, animal rights organizations calling for boycotts, fans burning jerseys they'd bought for players who weren't even Michael Vick. Sports radio in Philadelphia, which, if you've listened to it, is not a place known for measured responses, was running at a temperature we don't have a name for. Donovan McNabb was the starter. Vick was the backup. He was going to hold a clipboard and hope. Head coach Andy Reid had made the call. He had spoken privately with Vick for months before the signing. He believed the man standing in front of him was different from the man who had been led out of that Richmond courthouse 2 years earlier. We were skeptical. Most of us were skeptical. That's fair. We'd been given reasons to be. What happened next is part of the public record, so we don't need to linger on it, but we need to note it, because context matters. By 2010, Donovan McNabb was in Washington. Michael Vick was the starter in Philadelphia, and the season he had that year was, statistically and by the eye test, the best football of his career. 21 touchdown passes, fewer than 6 interceptions, 676 rushing yards, a quarterback rating over 100. He was named to the Pro Bowl. He won Comeback Player of the Year. The NFL Network ran segments about it. Sports Illustrated ran a cover. People who had been ready to write a final chapter on Michael Vick were suddenly trying to find language for what they were watching. We didn't quite have the language, because it wasn't just that he was playing well. It was the way he talked about it in press conferences. Quieter than before, more careful, less of the bravado that a 23-year-old with a $100 million contract might wear like a uniform. Something had been taken out of him that had not been put back, and what replaced it looked from a distance like something closer to gratitude. Or maybe it looked like a man who understood, for the first time, exactly what he had. The money started coming in again. Eagles contract, then the Jets briefly, then Pittsburgh. A few million here, a few million there, nowhere near the $130 million of the early Atlanta years, but enough to run the Chapter 11 plan. He made the payments every quarter, every year. By 2014, he had paid back nearly all of it. By 2017, the same year he officially retired from professional football, the bankruptcy trustee confirmed that Michael Vick had repaid $17,400,000 out of the $17,600,000 he owed, 99%. The trustee called it nearly unheard of in cases of this scale. Here's where this story gets complicated in a way that easier documentaries don't want to sit with. None of that repayment brings back the 18 dogs in those shallow graves. Not $1 of it. The families of people whose lives intersect with what happened in Surry County, the advocates, the people who work in animal rescue, the people who understand in a specific and personal way what dogfighting does. Many of them have said, plainly and with full justification, that the money doesn't change what it was. They're not wrong. And Michael Vick, to his credit, in the interviews he's given in the years since, the moments where someone asks him the hard question directly instead of politely, has not told them they're wrong either. He's said more than once, "I understand why some people will never forgive me. I understand that. I'm not asking them to." That's the closest thing to the right answer there is. Today he coaches at Norfolk State University. The Coach Vick Experience, a documentary series that followed his first season as a college head coach, aired in early 2026. His players call him Coach. They run the plays he installs. They come to him with questions about pressure, about decision-making, about what it means to be responsible for something bigger than yourself. He doesn't hide what he did. When it comes up, and it comes up, he talks about it. He built a business, V7 Hydration, sponsorships, media appearances. The slow accumulation of a post-football life that looks, from the outside, like a man who has found somewhere to put his energy that isn't a stadium. Whether that's enough, we'll get there in a second. But first, I want to note something that I think gets lost in this story. He was inducted into the Virginia Tech Sports Hall of Fame in January 2026. He stood at a podium in Blacksburg, Lane Stadium, where 27 years ago he first made us understand we were watching something different, and he gave a speech. He thanked his coaches, he thanked his teammates, he talked about what the game gave him and what he gave back. He didn't mention Surry County. I'm not sure whether that was the right call or not. I've thought about it. Maybe it was wrong to leave it out. Maybe after 20 years, one speech gets to just be about football. I don't know. I watched Michael Vick play football for the better part of a decade. I had a specific understanding of who he was, a kid from a hard place who ran faster than anyone I'd ever seen, who made the game look possible in ways it hadn't before. Some of that understanding was right. Some of it was a story I told myself because it was easier than the full picture. The full picture is harder. It has things in it that don't resolve. 18 dogs, $17 million. A man coaching college kids in Norfolk who seemed genuinely glad he's there. All of those things are true at the same time. So I'll leave you with the question I can't stop coming back to. If a person can do the worst thing we know about Michael Vick, and then spend the next 15 years doing the work we've described in this video. Who is he? Not who was he. Not who should he be. Right now, today, who is he? That's not a rhetorical question. That's the one we each have to answer for ourselves.